Hi, I'm Robert Wright. I run the Non-Zero Foundation, which produces all the shows on Blogging Heads TV and Meaning of Life TV. We host a variety of voices, some of them pretty unorthodox, and we encourage dialogue that is sharp but civil. We think fostering constructive conversation is especially important now that America and the world are looking kind of fragile. If you agree that our mission is important, I hope you'll consider helping us shoulder the cost. You can do that by becoming one of our cherished patrons at patreon.com/nonzero foundation. That's NONZEROFOUNDATION. Thanks. We need your help, and we deeply appreciate it.
Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So Wednesday morning, we are out of the Massachusetts primaries. We are past Biden's speech and Trump's visit to Kenosha. We're getting some more polling data post-convention. And last time we talked, I think it was last time we talked, not in between. Like you were a little nervous because in your heart you want Biden. That Trump was successfully winning back right-leaning suburbanites with his talk of violence and looting and rioting in Democratic cities. And are you still feeling the same nervousness?
Well, look, I think Joe Biden gave a very good speech that assuaged some of those concerns. I understand the hesitancy to do so, right? So not only does Biden have to worry about depressing his own base, but in a sense, by talking about this issue, civil unrest, he is allowing Trump to change the subject from COVID, where Trump loses, from the economy, where Trump loses, to civil unrest, where Trump has a shot. So you could make an argument that if Biden's talking about civil unrest, he's losing. I would argue instead that this is Donald Trump's only play. It is an act of desperation. It could work. It is an emotional issue. It is an issue that appeals to the exact people Trump needs to have show up and vote for him. So if Joe Biden can hit him off and make it impossible to cast Joe Biden as Biden's sort of joke, like, do I look like a radical socialist? If Biden can cut that off and head that off, then I think he really leaves Donald Trump without a lane. And so that is why I thought it was the right thing to do. And I actually think Biden probably needs to do more. Now, look, there are some people. Well, there are people who are moving the bar, and people who it's never enough for them, right?
He didn't say Antifa. Why doesn't he call Antifa and BLM?
Yeah. And I think that you could argue that he should, but I think this is not – the people who are saying that are not necessarily saying it in good faith. They are saying it because nothing Biden will ever do will ever be good enough for them. I am suggesting it, I think, in good faith, that cut this off. Do not allow Donald Trump to have this issue. It's the only thing he's got. And so strategically speaking, never mind ethics and morals and the fact that we should be condemning violence. I think from a political standpoint, Biden did exactly what he needed to do. And I would say don't let up.
So I don't know if you saw, there's a new ad, which is all audio from that speech. So it's not just a one-off, like he's making this, fairly prominent in the campaign. But the imagery in the ad, to the extent that it is highlighting one side of the violence, it's of people waving Trump flags. It's the images of the Trump caravan in Portland where they're driving a truck into a small crowd of protesters and spraying them with tear gas. and the Trump flags are very visible. So not only is he not going out of his way to say Antifa, he's saying, look who's committing the violence here.
Well, it's an interesting thing, right? Because on one hand, I think that in places like Portland, you've had unrest and violence going on for months. But if you want to look at the body count, you could argue that right-wing extremists have actually, not counting the police, that right-wing extremists have actually done as much or more, right? So I guess it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I made a comment on Twitter, and I wasn't trying to be declarative and saying I've done all the number counting myself. I said there is evidence that there's more right-wing violence than left-wing violence, and a bunch of folks got mad at me that I was, spinning. I mean, one thing that I was influenced by. How are you defining violence? Are we counting dead people? Are we counting window smashing? There's that issue. And
well, what we know, Bill, we know that destroying property is not violence, but silence is violence. So we have to to make sure that we internalize. I
mean, I'm not on the in defense of looting camp, where window smashing is some heroic act. I'm just saying you can define these. As far as like who's doing more, you can define things differently. And there was a Washington Post analysis of, this was in a couple weeks ago, that was tallying up 27 deaths that have some association with protests and rioting, and argued that the vast majority of these were not committed by protesters. There were a couple there's one that's Boogaloo movement associated. And there are some that just seemingly are more random criminals, like in the vicinity of the protests, not necessarily protesters themselves. But
this strikes me as a new phenomenon. There's been in recent decades, kind of, right-wing domestic terrorism, Oklahoma City, and there's been no lack of right-wing domestic terrorism. But as far as I could tell in America, the hippies, it was like in the 1960s, it was basically, the hippies on the streets up against the police. And I don't know that there were the Ku Klux Klan there probably were instances in certain places where they clashed with civil rights protesters or something. But like the idea of having almost like paramilitary forces battling it out on the streets seems like a kind of a new thing for America. Am I missing something?
Well, as far as like the battling on the streets, I'm not aware of an obvious historic parallel.
Like conservatives and Republicans weren't like, we don't protest. We don't go to, like, this is part of my part of my ethos. It's like, there is the National Right to Life, the march, right? The annual march, but it's, you could wear a blazer and khakis to that. Mm-hmm. We don't do that stuff. And it used to be like, let the police would handle that. And so the idea of sort of a normal standard issue young Republican being like, I'm going to go fight hippies in the streets rather than allow the Chicago police to take care of it, outsource it to them. It seems like a new scary development.
Well, I'll leave it to the commenter. I don't know off the top of my head how much right-wing hippie punching vigilantism was going on in the 60s, and then how much it was just like, let the cops do it for me. I just don't know.
I'm curious. I don't either. If someone, maybe there's a book. Maybe I could have done some Google research.
I'm sure there are books. Someone must have this answer for us. But as far as like the imagery that you see 1960 Democratic Convention, cops beating the heck out of hippies. Like, that's what kind of is burned into your brain. You don't see images like you see in Portland where you have, organized conservative caravans, seeking out left-wing protesters and mixing it up. And it does look like the person that was shot in Portland was shot by someone who personally identified with Antifa. So I'm sure if that person is arrested and more is known, you will see folks on the right saying, aha, Antifa is violent, Antifa is doing this and that. And look, historically there is left-wing violence and right-wing violence. So it's somewhat of a silly argument, who's doing more. The point is that Biden is the one who's saying this is all bad, and Trump's the one who's really picking and choosing here.
Yeah. And I think, Trump is doing it because that's what he does, and that's the way he sees the world in this tribalistic our team versus their team. But I also think it's strategic, and Trump does not. I mean, Kellyanne Conway basically admitted to this on TV. Like, the more unrest and violence there is, the better it is for Trump. And it's not a big leap to say that Trump would like to stoke this, because he is stoking it.
They may think that way. I think that's totally wrong. The chaos is terrible for Trump. And it was clearly terrible for Trump in the summer after George Floyd. That's just demonstrable in the polling. Now you had in the past week, you had this glimmer of an argument that perhaps this is going to rebound to Trump's benefit. And so Trump was trying to drive it to be such. And then Biden shows up and he's Joe Biden. He's not waving the black Antifa flag. And all of a sudden it seems like a more ridiculous argument all over again. And so I don't know if you saw the.
And I think that's I think that's really the X factor here, is that Democrats nominated a guy that has made it, just by virtue of his persona, the fact that he is so well known, his temperament, and the way he's running this campaign, that Trump can't do what he needs to do. Like, this might work if Democrats had nominated somebody else, but it's not working on Joe Biden.
You'd have a shot with Bernie Sanders at pinning it on Bernie. But I still think the standard analysis, your baseline is chaos is bad for the incumbent. And you can go back to the Alan Lichtman 13 keys if you wish. Is there so widespread social unrest? If so, that's bad for the incumbent. That's part of his analysis. And that seems to be borne out by what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I agree. But you have to realize we have to we have to have humility, and we have to put aside, or we have to be open to the idea that everything we know or think we know about politics could be out the window. And Trump is trying to run not as the incumbent. He's not running as the incumbent. He's running as the challenger. He's pretending like he hasn't been in charge. It's suspension of reality. Well,
he's running as a conspiracy theorist up against the federal government. It's not even just like a standard outsider campaign. Said there are dark forces flying Antifa planes trying to thwart me. So it really takes out. This is a slight aside, but I learned this week that one of the Q congressional candidates is in my district. There's a Q candidate up against my Democratic incumbent in Massachusetts too.
Is this a young person?
I don't think she's young. I mean, she ran last time. She's just talking about Q this time.
Oh, I thought you said Q kid. You said Q candidate.
Okay. Yeah.
Crazy world, man. I mean, of all places, right? You think you might be safe in Northampton, but no.
She's not from Northampton. She's Worcester area, but nevertheless.
Wait, isn't it Worcester, Bill? I heard it's pronounced Worcester.
Are you ready to segue into Massachusetts, or do you want to talk?
I think I just did.
But let me just wait 1 second for that though, because I was struck by the Students for Trump tweet that showed Trump walking through the streets of Kenosha around rubble, saying, you know, Trump's trying to save us from Biden's America. And everyone was like, you have not read this image the right way, kids. The incumbent president is walking through rubble. That is the worst possible image you could be putting out there. But they really don't seem to get it.
I think you, again, Bill, I think you're thinking too logically, or maybe it could be that I'm wrong. I put more stock in the ability of Trump to reframe things and to cast things in a different perspective. You were thinking logically, and I think that Trump is trying to make us behave in a way that is irrational and emotional and plays to our tribalistic nature. And I don't think I'm either paranoid or scared of this. And that may be. And look, it's better, especially if you're a Democrat. I'll just say, if you're a Democrat, you should be overestimating Trump's ability to do this. OK, and then if I end up looking silly, fine. But I fear, Bill, that you are too calm and thinking like, oh, the voters are going to realize that Trump owns this because he's been president. I'm not so confident.
Well, you know, I definitely have an optimism bias, and I'll own that. But you're speaking like a pessimistic Democrat who is constantly terrified.
I'm a bedwetter. I'm a bedwetter. No matter, I'll bedwet in whichever party he wants. I bedwet all the time.
Democrats are routinely terrified at Republican ability to reframe the media narrative, to use conservative media to change the game, at Trump's ability to throw rhetorical bombs with the help of conservative media. And there's evidence for that over time. I just think, based on what we have seen, I mean, I'm not projecting forward. I'm looking at what has happened. And based on all the polling we have seen, there's a swing voter element that is not being swayed, is not being captured by these reframing attempts. So there was a poll so I think you and I had a bit of this discussion. I had a bit of Twitter discussion with Dave Wasserman about this. Dave Wasserman is the data analyst for Political Report and 538.
Yeah.
My
latest column, by the way, at the Daily Beast, let me just plug it, asks if there is a hidden army of Trump supporters waiting to arise.
And this is based on his estimates that there are 4.8 million white non-college voters, I think in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and only 2 million or so.
Yeah.
What's that?
They're not voters. They're not voters.
Folks who did not vote in 2016 but are demographically suited to Donald Trump and could be pulled off the sidelines. And there's only about 2 million or so of Democratic-friendly demographics in those three states. Now, I think I mentioned last show, there's another guy who did an estimate that's different. So there's dueling estimates out there. But just this morning.
But why? I mean, and both of these people seem credible, but I would say I think Wasserman particularly has a very solid reputation.
Full respect for Wasserman. I'm not here to dump on his numbers. I'm just pointing out that it's not, end of story, that these numbers are the numbers. But we also don't know how those numbers are going to break. I mean, sure, those people might exist, but do they vote? And do they vote disproportionately for Donald Trump? There is a Seltzer poll. Ann Seltzer is the famous pollster who's known for her Iowa polling, but she also does national polling, and she just released a poll today that had Biden up 8 points. This is a post-convention poll. And this is a likely voter poll, but she broke out in the crosstabs 2016 Trump voters, Clinton voters, and non-voters. So she has mean, you may question the methodology, but she's saying these are likely voters in 2020 who are non-voters in 2016, and they break for Biden 53-34. Now, that's not just those 3 states. That's nationally.
Sure. Yeah, and that was going to be my next. That was going to be my next point, which is number one, Trump, according to Wasserman, and I've heard this other places, it's possible that Trump could lose the popular vote by as much as 5 points and still win the Electoral College. And, you know, look, if these 2016 non-voters break for Biden nationally, it doesn't matter if in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, they all, you know, not all, but they disproportionately break for Trump. So that's, you know, that's the asterisk.
I think the Wasserman analysis is too tethered to the 2016 cultural fault lines. I think it's not taking into account that Biden is going to do better than Hillary with white non-college, with independents, with seniors. We've seen that across the board, and seems to be pulling in more college whites. So these demographics, you know, sure, maybe you're going to get some 2020 voters who weren't 2016 voters, but I mean, I don't have like the concrete analysis that makes this QED, but I think we have a lot of circumstantial evidence here that it's not going to break the same way for Trump as it did last time because he's the incumbent. The incumbent is unpopular, and he's presiding around rubble and pandemic.
No, look, I agree. I think, you know, Biden's better than Hillary Clinton. And last time we could imagine whatever future we wanted. Trump wasn't the incumbent. We didn't have the experience. We could imagine that Trump would get, you know, serious and pivot, and we can't do that anymore, right? So I tend to think Biden's probably going to win. I just have to say, this is exactly why Democrats should be worried about the civil unrest, the law and order issue, because I think Biden will probably win. But if there is anything that could force white voters, be they working class whites in Pennsylvania or suburban kind of Romney type voters, to change, it would be the notion that the left has gone too far. We see these videos of people being accosted at restaurants by the woke left. We see, instances on, Twitter, not to mention the unrest in the streets. You know, I just did a podcast yesterday with Shadi. I don't know if you know Shadi from Brookings and the Atlantic. And we did a whole conversation about this topic, and I have to say, I told him, and I was being honest. I mean, there have been times where I see something on Twitter, like a video of the left, or even in the New York Times, where, like, for a second, it's like, I want to vote for Trump. And if a guy who has been, I would venture to say that I have written more anti-Trump columns than almost anybody in America. And if I have on occasion felt like, doing that, what about the average person out there, who wants to be a Republican, wants to vote Republican, but just doesn't like Trump? I mean, I think maybe that's why I have this concern, Bill.
Well, I would say two things to that, or actually one statement, one question. Democrats could not have nominated someone more culturally attuned to white working class voters as Joe Biden. I mean, I don't think anyone exists in the party, save for maybe a Joe Manchin or a John Tester, who is going to have that bent. So you're not going to blindside him on this stuff. You're not going to find Biden saying, "Oh, there are voters that care about law and order. I had no idea. What should I do, people?" Like he gets that, and the fact that
is there still time to start calling him Joe Mudcat Biden? Like, could we affix a nickname?
And the fact is, Biden is always going to take his time. He's not a knee-jerk reactor. He's like, a steady quarterback, all kinds of time. He's going to take his few days. He's going to write his speech out, practice it a few times, make sure it's just the way he wants it, and then he's going to come out. I just don't think you have to, as far as you saying you want to worry, I don't think you have to worry about that. Biden's not going to be caught off guard.
Let me just say, and I think you're right. I think Biden wins. But 4 years ago, Bill, and I could pull the tape. 4 years ago, we did this. And I was like, I'm afraid, I think Trump's going to win. This is, and you talked me down. You were calm, and you had the facts, you had the data, you had the historical data. And you literally, I think you had a podcast called Talk Me Down.
I did.
And you talked me down. And then Trump won. And so, and again, things are different. It's a different world. But I think maybe I have a freak out bias and you have a normalcy bias.
That is definitely true. And I own that and accept that. But I would say
That's why it's such a good show.
I have tried to learn from 2016. I mean, if I'm making a mistake, I'm making a new mistake. I looked at the 2016 polls, like, how did I get this? How was this all wrong? And I'm sure I've said this on a past show, but you see the dips in Hillary's polling in 2016. They were brief. So you could look at them and say, well, there are these dips. They only happen a few times. She bounces back. She got pneumonia and she fell down, but she bounced back. So I'm not gonna focus on the dips. I'm gonna focus on where the vast majority of polling is, and that ignored how relevant the dips would be, and also that her upper bound was still kind of low. I mean, she would be up maybe 5-6 points, but she was still hanging around like mid 40s. She was never getting to 50, and that third party element was still dragging her down. And I think a chunk of that third party vote, broke to Trump at the end of the day. So that's the stuff that I was missing. And so I can look now and say, look, Biden's not dipping. It's been stable all year. He's better in the crosstabs in these key demos than Hillary was. So I'm not going to take the errors of 2016 and just assume they still exist when the data's not showing me that.
Well, I think, Bill, look. The reason this show works is, I'm operating in good faith. I know you're operating in good faith. And look, I think there are probably people on the left who don't want Biden to reach out too much to people like never Trumpers and suburbanites for ideological reasons. But I get a sense also, putting them aside, I get a sense that, like, when I write something or tweet something out of the abundance of caution, saying Biden needs to do this or just be careful about this, it is interpreted by some people as me rooting for Trump. Like when I said, so like on Sunday, and I wasn't the only one, but I was one of the people on Sunday saying, hey, look, I mean, data schmata, it feels like this could slip away from Biden. And the thing is, once the narrative shifts, it's hard to get it back. I think he needs to tackle this issue. I think he needs to I know he's condemned the violence. He needs to more forcefully, personally condemn this civil unrest. And guess who agreed with me? Joe Biden and his people, because they did exactly what I thought they should do. But there were people on Twitter, Bill, who were attacking me. And the sense I got is that they believe that by virtue of me sort of warning Biden and saying, hey, feels like this issue is like picking up some momentum, that I was somehow like trying to hurt Biden or help Trump. And I just don't know where that comes from. But what's the deal with that?
So have you gotten your Twitter followers back? The ones you lost when you were speaking highly of the McCloskey segment at the RNC, have you won those followers back now that you're saying Biden gave the speech of his lifetime?
No, I've been gaining lately. The last week
you
I've been
have gotten
steadily
some back.
I have. Yeah, I'm up to I was at, let me look at my numbers here. You know, Bill, I don't pay attention to to my Twitter numbers, so I have to look to see actually where I am. So like at my high point this year, I was at like 87.8 thousand. That was at my high point, and then I supported Justin Amash, and then I said I wouldn't vote for Biden, and I lost over 1,000. I went from like 87.8 to like 86.8. I'm back to 87.2. So I've rebounded. I'm still like 500 or 500 or 600 below my high point, which would have been let's say June 1st, or I don't know when the Amash thing might have been spring. But anyway, Matt Lewis hardest hit, clearly.
But I think you are successfully taking big swings in these moments and proving, you're a party of one. You're not in the tank for either candidate here. If you're in the tank for anybody, it's Justin Amash. You'd probably be spinning for him if you jump back in the race. Why you are on the Joe Jorgensen bandwagon is beyond me.
This is the Libertarian nominee, right?
Yeah. You've given her a short shrift. I don't know where she is on
abortion. I'm just going to write in Ronald Reagan.
You should check where she is on abortion. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think I'm just going to write in zombie Ronald Reagan and be done with it.
Well, let's jump to Massachusetts, okay?
So, yes, Worcester. How do I say this?
Worcester. It's Worcester.
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 Yeah, I think
there are all these areas have these regional, like in Virginia. What's the area where the Woodrow Wilson Library is, or do you know?
In Virginia?
I'm trying to think. It's in Virginia, yeah.
Is it Stoughton?
Stanton.
Stanton, okay.
It's I think it's pronounced Stanton,
okay,
but it looks like Staunton. And so I think every state probably has these places where, shibboleths or whatever, where you could spot an outsider.
Have you been
who
there?
Doesn't really know how to say.
Have you been to the Wilson site?
I've driven by the Woodrow Wilson Museum 100 times, and I've never stopped.
I need you to stop in.
I want to. I just drove past it like on the 4th of July when I went to Monticello. Maybe you drive by it on the way to Charlotte.
Maybe that should be a Madam Bill road trip. Hit all the Wilson sites.
Let's make it happen. And I think if we do the road trip, we need to bring, the DM Zoom folks. We can live stream the whole thing. So
well, yeah, as you know, I'm the world's worst, Woodrow Wilson shill. There is a new academic paper out showing how much his segregationism of the federal workforce, how much that negatively impacted African-American wages in D.C. So it's new research that just came out this past week. Folks want to track that down.
Wow.
But back to Massachusetts. So I got to say, if you listened to last week's show and heard my analysis of the race, of the Kennedy-Markey race and the Neil Morse race, I'd say it was all pretty spot on. Markey's late polling break held up. Kennedy was unable to, at the end of the day, to make a case why the incumbent should be thrown out. And Morse was not able to crack into Springfield, which is the population heart of the district. He also did not flip the Berkshire County, although he did a little better in the southern part of that county, but the more popular area in the north, he still lost. And most humiliating for Morris, he lost his own city of Holyoke. And which I wasn't assuming. I thought Neil would hold his own in Holyoke. I didn't think Morse was going to lose it. I had a tweet a month or so ago. I drove the length of Holyoke, which it's not that big of a city, on one of the main commercial drags, Route 5, which has a bit of residential property there. And I said I saw 6 Neil signs and 3 more signs, which said to me, obviously there's signs. It's 9 signs in a city of of a voting population of a few thousand. You don't want to run too far with that, but it did say to me, Neil's got presence here. And if Neil has presence in Holyoke and it's not going to be a blowout in Holyoke, I mean, Holyoke was not going to determine the race, but Morse would need to do very well in a lot of places, first and foremost his own city, if he was going to pull off the upset. And the evidence by the signage was that wasn't happening, and I do think that was borne out. A lot of folks,
the David Broder of Massachusetts, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't drive any cabs in Holyoke. Didn't
he used to go door to door?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Am I thinking of the right guy?
Yeah, he was the classic shoe leather, knocking the doors in Iowa and telling you what's going on. And a lot of the the Morse partisans are angry, understandably, that in the last weekend, there was the whole controversy about whether Moore did anything inappropriate sexually with college students. There was the letter from the college Democrats to Moore saying, we don't want you coming to our events anymore because students have said they're uncomfortable based on your past activity, which Morse initially apologized for and then got defiant, saying this was a setup, and there's some evidence that it was a setup. But the evidence that it was a setup is not conclusive. I mean, so from the Intercept reporting, it was making it sound like Morse has been vindicated. Well, it's not that simple. They found this text exchange from 2 people that certainly sounds like it was a setup. College Dems at one point said, well, there are other people. It's not just these 2. But the UMass Amherst Dems wrote an apology letter to Morse. College Dems said their own kind of apology, but it's still a little murky what exactly happened because people haven't spoken up who made the initial accusations. Nevertheless, the issue was kind of fading in the debate where the Morse people were talking about Neil being a pay-to-play corporate lapdog, and the Neil-friendly PAC was talking about Morse's record not going to school committee meetings and not disciplining cops who were involved in police brutality. And the Neil campaign ads are mostly about, look at all the awesome things Richie Neil has done. Richie Neil's been here forever. We all know Richie Neil. Richie's great. Richie's brought home the bacon, that kind of stuff. And then the last weekend, the Neil-friendly PAC, American Working Families PAC, which is all the nasty anti-Morse stuff, runs an ad that mentions the sexual misconduct allegations. And this has not been any ads before this point. This ad runs on Saturday. Immediately, the PAC puts out a statement saying, this was run in error. We didn't want to run this ad. And we've told the stations to pull it. And immediately people are like, that's nonsense. You cut the ad. You cut the ad. You know how to buy ads. Was
this just to call more attention? Was this just to call more attention to the ad by pretending that they didn't want to run it?
The PAC then says, we didn't want to run this because we didn't want to call more attention to this. We didn't want this to be a distraction.
Yeah.
The Nixonian analysis is intentionally doing the opposite. Now, they say they want the ad pulled. The ad is still running Sunday morning. So this feeds the conspiracy theory that this was all intentional. Now, I don't know whether it was intentional or not. Even assuming that it is intentional, I do not think this is why Morse lost. It is still a couple of runs of an ad in a sea of ads that did not talk about it. Consider that Morse was already losing a massive money disparity before the controversy. Neil was swamping Morse in the ad game before that point. Huge money disparity. No evidence Morse was cracking into Springfield, which I always said was the ball game. You never saw a flood of Morse signs in Springfield. You never saw huge rallies for Morse in Springfield. You look at the video of Morse going door to door in Springfield on the last day. Like these are tiny things he was doing. Like his bigger support was outside the city. And what happens after the controversy starts? That's when Morse gets his fundraising boom. That's when the ad game starts to reach near parity because Morse got a flood of cash because of the backlash to the controversy. And what is the evidence that Massachusetts one is so homophobic that it wouldn't want to elect a gay candidate? This is a state that has a leader on gay marriage. This is a state that stood by Barney Frank and Jerry Studs when they were in worse hot water. I just don't see the evidence that this is fertile ground for it. I mean, that's not, QED. Franks and Studs and gay marriage is not QED. The bigger point is that Neil was clearly winning before all of this, and there's no evidence that this made things worse for Morse. There was, the other big thing was the Kennedy loss, right? Yeah. And I think,
I sort of at the macro level, what I wonder, what are there 24-1 in Massachusetts now? I think something like that.
Markey is 25-0. The Markey name is now untouchable.
The Kennedys had this dynasty. And, Bill, we weren't alive when Jack Kennedy was president, but in our lifetime, the Kennedys maintained this dynasty and this Camelot image. Is it now, are we now enough decades into it where finally the Kennedy allure is maybe it's counterproductive even. Maybe the privilege has caught up to them. Like, are we finally past the thing where being a Kennedy was a big deal, was magic?
I don't believe there was Kennedy antipathy broadly. I mean, obviously with Markey partisans, surely. But I don't think people were disgusted that Kennedy jumped in the race in the first place. And the people in his own district speak very highly of him. He's not seen in Massachusetts 4 as an empty suit career climber. He's seen at home as someone who did the work. But clearly, I think there was an overestimation at how powerful the name is statewide because he was leading in the early polling. But the early polling was like, I don't know the numbers at the top of my head, but it was something like, Kennedy 36, Markey 24. It wasn't Kennedy 72, Markey 28. Markey was just a low name ID guy, an unusually low name ID for an incumbent, especially an incumbent in Massachusetts. And the Kennedy name has an innately higher name ID. So once Markey got to the point where you had the combination of the AOC endorsement and the Boston Globe endorsement, these are, endorsements are usually not important at all. You can't transfer, Pelosi's endorsement obviously didn't save Kennedy. And I don't think Pelosi's endorsement helped Neil that much, although it was used in plenty of ads. It's what does the endorsement signify? What messaging does the endorsement validate and elevate? Markey needed to make an argument that I'm not a lazy incumbent. Don't think of me poorly because I don't visit the state as often as some folks might like. These are credible institutions saying that I'm in Washington doing very important work. And coming from different vantage points, you had the hardcore activists in AOC, and you had more of an establishment institution of the Boston Globe singing the same song. And that undercuts the Kennedy message, which is Markey wasn't using the power of the office the way that he should. that there was a better way for an incumbent to act and yield social change. He never had an issue wedge with Markey. He had a stylistic argument against Markey, which AOC and the Globe undercut. So I don't think Kennedy's
What was the stylist? What was it just I'll be home more, or was it I'm cooler, I'm younger? What was the stylistic?
I think it's all of that.
Difference?
I mean, Kennedy was essentially arguing that I'm going to use my my charisma, my high wattage, my facility for speech, and call attention to big issues. And Markey's argument was, that's not who I am. I'm not a big showboat, but I'm working on these issues, at my desk, and I'm putting forth legislation that's going to solve these problems. And maybe you haven't seen that over the course of the last several years, but here's some people who have seen me do the work and are vouching on my behalf.
Yeah. Would it be too much to say a torch has been passed to AOC? AOC is now the leader of the...
AOC's PAC endorsed Alex Morse and was not magic there. So this is not arguing that AOC has the golden touch. AOC used what prestige she has to make a case for a hardworking incumbent who gets in the weeds of legislation, which is different than the kind of endorsement that she or Justice Dems or Sunrise usually do. So I think it was important. I don't think it was a non-factor, but it's not the case that Massachusetts is so woke that whatever AOC does, people are going to follow. That's not the takeaway here. And conversely, if Massachusetts 1 was so horribly homophobic and so horribly conservative, why did Markey do so well in Massachusetts 1? These things don't add up so cleanly. You got to get under the surface a little bit here. And I also think Kennedy still has a future, but he has. I mean, the reason why he did this race was he can't wait for an open Senate seat, which will probably come in the near future. Both Warren and Markey are up there in age. But when that happens, he's put up against Ayanna Pressley, who is the lone African-American in the Massachusetts delegation, and that might be a very hard one-on-one primary for him. If he waits for governor, Maura Healey, who is attorney general, very liberal, lesbian, that might be a hard one-on-one primary for him, too. I think he has to think about maybe when Healey runs for governor, he runs for AG, or he runs for lieutenant governor, which is a separate election in Massachusetts.
Well, when are white men named Kennedy going to get their shot? I mean, come on.
I mean, I think this white male Kennedy is going to have to pay more dues and wait for his opening, because there isn't an imminent opening for him. But he's very young and is very likable and has fans, and I think he can be patient and wait for that shot. Now, Morse also has a similar
mountain moonshine.
Morse has to worry about this too, because he gave a pretty defiant concession speech and made it pretty clear he's looking at running again. He also doesn't have a lot of openings for things to run for. He is in his fourth term as mayor. I mean, he's 31 years old, but he's been mayor for 10 years, almost 10 years, which is pretty long tenure for mayor. Mayors, have a shelf life. There's a point where you hang around too long and you piss off enough people and you don't win anymore. So he has to decide next year whether he's running for a fifth term. But if he is going to run for Congress again, he's from a small city in a low popular area of the state. Western Mass politicians don't do great statewide typically. So he's not in an easy track to run for AG, lieutenant governor, governor. I mean, lieutenant governor might be a non-crazy option for him. But he couldn't jump to governor or lieutenant governor very easily, or AG very easily.
Yeah.
He could run for the Congress again. Now, if he wants to do that, why run for mayor again next year when you could lose? He lost his home city to Neil. So that in of itself is not end of the story. But you lost your home city. You signaled you want to get out of Dodge. You'd be running for a 5th term, which is dicey in its own right. All that to me adds up for, hey, skip it and just run Congress full time for 2022. Now, maybe he's going to run up against Neil again. If so, that's going to be hard because Neil is very, very popular in Springfield. This race proved that. If Morse is going to beat him, he's got to crack into Springfield, and he didn't figure out how to do that. So it's not just, some folks are like, well, Cori Bush won the second time around. Okay, but I can't speak to what she did differently, but it's not simply running a second time that does the trick. You have to do something different. You have to build on what you built before. And Springfield is not the Bronx. It's not Queens. It's not St. Louis. It is not as progressive a city, and he's got to figure out how to solve that puzzle. Now, maybe the Neil doesn't run again. He may achieve some career capstone in the next term and decide that I'm done. But there are other politicians who have Springfield ties that might run a Neil if Neil doesn't. The best hope for Morse, in my opinion, is a crowded field where maybe Springfield, if their vote is split, and he can sneak through in a multi-person race. Massachusetts 4, which is Kennedy's district. It's too close to call still, but it looks like the most moderate candidate, the candidate vote that worked for Charlie Baker, the Republican governor, is going to win with 22% of the vote because the several progressive candidates split the progressive vote.
Well, Bill, I probably should head out soon. I'm as you know, I have my weekly lunch with Mom, also my focus group. Anything I should ask?
Did she see the Biden speech, and what did she think of it?
That's going to be the question.
And do you think the Antifa plane is real?
I doubt if she's heard of the Antifa plane, but who knows? It's possible.
You should ask her who is Q.
It's possible. I don't think she knows who Q. I don't even think she knows about Q.
I don't think you want to ask.
I mean, I hope she doesn't know.
I think you're afraid to hear the answer.
Is there any? So the Antifa plane? Could there be? I mean, it sounds insane, and I loved how Laura Ingraham was trying to talk him down from stuff, and you don't mean to compare golfing to someone being shot, Of course not. But do you think there's any an element of truth to the Antifa plane, some element of truth that someone told him and that he twisted into this weird story?
I'm sure someone told him about the Antifa plane. He didn't totally make it up himself, but it's nonsense from start to finish.
Well, maybe somebody was on a plane and there was a person from Antifa on the plane, and that became an Antifa plane.
I mean maybe, but
I don't know.
It's still ridiculous. Now, the other part of the Ingrid interview that was fascinating to me, because I grew up in Westchester County, New York, was when Trump was asked about the whole abolish the suburbs thing, and he went this whole riff of I know the suburbs. Westchester County, what they were trying to do to Westchester County, put low-income housing in Westchester County. It's a beautiful place. It's the American dream. How dare they do this to beautiful Westchester? And there have been a lot of affordable housing fights in Westchester. No doubt. There's a 27-year desegregation fight in Yonkers, which the segregationists eventually lost. And there's one housing project in Yonkers because of it. And Westchester is a pretty de facto segregated place. But it's almost majority minority at this point. And it has now elected, or is about to elect, 2 African Americans to Congress, one who is a DSA member. So, Trump is, in a sense, not wrong that people in Westchester try to keep wealthy in Westchester, try to keep low-income housing away from their neighborhoods and have for a long time. But it's also a pretty socially liberal place, and people are willing to vote for Democrats, even while they're trying to keep, even if they may have a NIMBY streak. So I don't think Trump's going to succeed in turning Westchester suburban liberals away from Joe Biden on this argument.
He may be out of touch. It's possible Trump is a little out of touch with some stuff. Let me plug some stuff, Bill. I mentioned the Shadi Hamid podcast, which I highly recommend. If you want some good bedwetting, get in there, pull up the covers. It's nice and warm.
Hot and wet.
I think there's a Jim Gaffigan
We
joke about
didn't
that, but I won't go into
Gaffigan.
it.
Jim Gaffigan.
We did, Jim. No, we did a whole
But he
discussion
responded.
in the DM.
He had a
in the DM
Facebook
Zoom
post.
about- yeah.
He doubled down a Facebook post. What'd you think about that?
I saw that.
Are you still with Jim Gaffigan?
Well, yeah. Look, I don't quit listening to Bruce Springsteen because I disagree with his politics, Bill. I'm not one of those people. But I think that Gaffigan let us down a little bit. It's against brand, and I want him to be. He sells an image of somebody who is family friendly and somewhat apolitical, and that's not what he's doing right now. He is off brand.
Maybe Jim Gaffigan is the voice of the swing voter. Maybe he is the canary in the coal mine. Or the canary in the boat parade.
I don't know if he still lives in New York City, but for many years he had like a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City with like 8 kids. Because his wife's Catholic and he's a bad Catholic, I think he would say. So I don't know that Jim Gaffigan, even though he has the image of kind of an everyman, is really representative of Joe's six-pack. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's what this is about.
Well, if the Catholic vote goes to Joe Biden, we should hereby call it the Gaffigan factor. Who are Gaffigan voters.
That's going to be the name of our podcast, the Gaffigan Factor. No, I mean the Catholic vote is almost always indicative of who wins, right? I mean and I think it's, and I don't want to confuse causation and correlation. It just may be that as the Catholic vote goes, there goes the country. But they seem to. I don't know about Trump, Hillary, but by and large, I think that pretty much whoever wins the Catholic vote also wins the election. So anyway, check out the podcast with Shadi Hamid and yours truly, doing some bedwetting, especially on his part, since I think he wanted Bernie to win originally. So he's much more progressive than I am. And also, I wrote that piece at the Daily Beast, Bill, about this invisible army of potential Trump voters. Check that out at the Daily Beast.
Excellent. I will leave you with the plugs for this week, and we'll talk next week. And are we Zooming? We Zooming Friday?
I think we have to. I think we have that responsibility to this community that we have built to step up.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you Friday.
We may have to start moving. As I mentioned, we're going to have an ongoing conversation about now that school will be starting and various other factors. We might want to move up, the time for those Friday DM Zooms.
Right. Okay.
But I'll have my people reach out to your people on that.
Okay. Well, till Friday, until next week. I'll see you then.
In the DMZ.
Take care.
Thanks, Bill.